Okay, so now let's talk about lymphocytes. So lymphocytes have to go through an education before they are set free to do their thing in the immune system. So we need to talk about B and T cell education. All right, so here's a cell, and here's a cell. And remember, these are lymphocytes. So here's a B, and the B cell, its receptor is, it's an antibody, right? It's B. And in the T cell, its receptor is a T cell receptor. So here's a T cell. And remember, these are really specific. So, this is what it's looking for, is that little thing right there. So, before it's set out and left to go and try to find its antigen, it has to go through an education process. So, it's a funky line, isn't it? It's an even funkier one. Okay, so it has two classes that it has to take and pass. The first one is called positive selection. And in positive selection, the cells have to show that they can bind to MHC2 platforms. Because you have to be able to bind MHC2 to be activated. And if you can't get activated, then you can't do anything. So they have to show that they can bind to MHC2. If the answer is yes, then that means that the cell is immunocompetent. So if the cell is immunocompetent, then it can be activated. Okay, so unfortunately, only about 5% pass. So if they don't pass, which 95% don't, they have to go through apoptosis or cell suicide. Okay, so only 5% are smart enough to pass this. Okay, if they pass, then the next class is called negative selection. And in negative selection, they have to show that they do not bind to self. If they don't bind to self, so if it's no, they do not, then they are self-tolerant. Self-tolerant. If it's a yes, they do bind to self, that is a fail, because binding to self basically means it's going to bind to healthy self cells and cause damage there. So like an autoimmune disease type of thing. So it cannot do that. So if it is a yes, it is a fail. And again, only about 5% pass. Failure. What does that mean? It means cell suicide or apoptosis. So a lymphocyte, a baby lymphocyte, is going to have to go through this process, the positive selection and negative selection, and they have to pass both classes in order to become mature or naive lymphocytes that can actually be released out into the body to look for their antigen. And remember, keep in mind, thymus does this, T sites do this in the thymus. They're born in the bone marrow, but they mature in the thymus. And B sites, born in the bone marrow, have education in the bone marrow. Okay? All right, so let's talk about B cell activation.